My stepson inherited everything. And his mother, with that cold smile she always wore, leaned toward me during the will reading and whispered, "You were never real family." But when the lawyer opened the final page, her face changed. She jumped from her seat, furious, shouting, "This can't be legal." And he only smiled. That moment still lives in my mind like a freeze frame. Not because of the anger, but because I knew I had taken back my life. But let's pause. Stories don't begin at explosions, they begin with a small flame. I'm glad you're here to hear mine. Before I go deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if stories like this stay with you long after they end, please like and subscribe. It truly helps me keep telling the truths I've held for years. Now, let me take you back. Back to when everything still felt warm. My name is Emily, 48 years old. 2 years ago, I was married to the love of my life, Thomas Clark. People say you fall in love once, but I think real love finds you when you've stopped expecting it. Thomas found me after a long, lonely season of my life, and he made ordinary days feel like home. Morning coffee with sunlight on the table, his hand always reaching for mine in the car, soft laughter at night over silly things we forgot during the day. He came with a past, like we all do, a son named Daniel and an ex-wife named Linda. Daniel was quiet, polite but distant, like he kept one foot inside our family and one foot out. I never pushed him. I thought time would soften him toward me. Linda was different. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue. She never liked that Thomas remarried. She once told me, in a voice sweet like honey but cold underneath, "Daniel only has one mother." I nodded politely back then. I didn't understand how those words would echo later. Life was peaceful. Birthdays, Thanksgiving dinners, movie nights. I cooked, Thomas grilled, Daniel occasionally joined, mostly when homework stress or breakups pulled him close to seek comfort from his father. We weren't perfect, but we tried. Still, there were moments, tiny ones, that I ignored. Like the time Daniel called Linda Mom and Thomas Dad, but referred to me only as Emily. Or when Linda dropped Daniel off and avoided looking at me, pretending I wasn't standing there with hot cocoa waiting for him. Or when I heard her once say quietly while she hugged him goodbye, "Don't ever forget who really fought for you." Small things, little cracks, I brushed them aside. If I'm honest, I was afraid to disturb the peace. Afraid that if I pushed too hard to be accepted, I would only be pushed further away. But love makes you patient. Sometimes patient to a fault. And I had no idea then that patience was building toward a storm I never saw coming. A storm that would begin the night Thomas collapsed in our kitchen, and nothing in our home ever felt the same again. Thomas's collapse wasn't dramatic like in movies. No thunder, no gasping, just a soft sound, glass slipping from his hand. I turned, expecting to scold him for being clumsy like always, but he was on the floor, eyes wide, trying to speak with no sound coming out. I remember the cup rolling in slow circles across the tiles. Funny what your brain chooses to notice when life shatters. I screamed his name, "Thomas, breathe. Please." My hand shook while dialing 911. Those minutes before the ambulance arrived felt like hours pressed into a single breath. Daniel arrived at the hospital 15 minutes after we did. He looked terrified, pale, eyes red, lips trembling. For the first time in years, he hugged me, tight, desperate, and I held him like he was my own. Linda came next, heels echoing down the hallway like anger made physical. She brushed past me to reach Thomas's bed, barely glancing at me. But I swallowed my pride. There was no space for ego in moments like this. Doctors said it was a stroke. Serious, but he had a chance. We stayed day and night, rotating shifts, hospital coffee, cold blankets, beeping machines that never stopped. For a moment, it felt like we were united, forced together by fear. I thought maybe this tragedy would heal old wounds. I was wrong. After a week, Thomas opened his eyes, but he wasn't fully there. Speech slurred, memory foggy, body weak. He needed rehab, time, patience, and love. I was ready. But Linda, she stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, voice low enough for only me to hear. If he can't manage finances anymore, everything goes to Daniel. It's what he would want. I blinked. Shock, pain, confusion. I whispered back, why are we talking about inheritance? He's alive. She smiled, thin, cruel, not grieving, calculating. Something shifted inside me that day. A suspicion, small but sharp, because while I held Thomas's hand, promising I wouldn't leave, she was discussing assets. Still, I kept silent. I chose grace. Maybe I shouldn't have. When Thomas finally came home, life wasn't the same. He needed help walking, someone to monitor his medication, someone to remind him of things he used to know easily. I took time off work, cooked soft foods, read to him at night. Daniel visited sometimes, not as often as before. School, friends, life, I understood. But Linda, she came more than ever. Too much. Bringing documents, mail, papers she insisted Thomas needed to sign. He trusted her, old habit, and his memory was shaky, so he didn't always remember what he signed. One afternoon, I found a folder she left behind. Inside, property papers, bank access forms, her signature, Daniel's signature, and a shaky scroll that looked like Thomas's. My stomach dropped. I asked him later, gently, do you remember signing anything today? He frowned, confused. Papers, maybe? Linda said it was bills. Bills? These weren't bills. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Linda's voice echo. Everything goes to Daniel. Was she planning something? Was I being pushed out of my own home? Or was I overthinking? I wanted to believe the best. But doubt wakes like a whisper and grows into thunder. And it was only the beginning, the first breadcrumb on a trail I hadn't meant to follow. A trail that would soon lead to the truth about that folder and the betrayal waiting behind it. The next morning, I waited until Thomas was napping, then opened that folder again, slower this time, more careful, as if the paper itself could bite. There were 3 documents, each one transferring partial authority of financial decisions to Daniel and Linda, not jointly, separately. 2 signatures I recognized, one shaky and recent, clearly Thomas's. But something felt wrong. His signature leaned left when he was tired, always had. These leaned right, almost traced. It wasn't proof, but it was a seed, and seeds grow roots. I heard a voice in my head, something my mother told me years ago. Pay attention to what hurts. Pain points to truth. I wanted to ignore those papers. Pretend life was normal. But you can't unsee what you've seen. That week, Linda started coming over unannounced. Sometimes she'd bring soup or groceries, but she always ended up near the study, near the drawer where the folder now lived. Once, when she thought I wasn't looking, I saw her hand reach for it. Slow, checking if I was around. She froze when she noticed me, smiled too fast, too bright, just grabbing a pen. There were pens in the kitchen. Later that day, I found the folder moved. Not missing, just shifted. Half an inch out of alignment. Small detail, big meaning. I decided to watch more carefully. One night, after putting Thomas to bed, I passed by the dining room and heard whispers. Linda and Daniel. Door slightly ajar. I paused, not proud, but necessary. Mom, she won't just hand it over, he whispered, voice tense. Linda replied softly, coldly, she will when she's out of the picture. My breath stopped. Out of the picture. Did she mean divorce? Removal from decisions? Something worse? I stepped back, heart pounding, pretending I was just grabbing water when I re-entered visibly. They both fell silent. Linda smiled again. That same practice sweetness. We were just talking about physical therapy plans. Physical therapy doesn't sound like she won't hand it over. Something was wrong. Very wrong. A few days later, out of respect for transparency, I asked Thomas, carefully, if he wanted Daniel entirely in charge of finances. He looked surprised, even hurt. No, he said slowly. We decide things together. Why? I told him gently about the papers. He frowned, confused, frustrated, trying to remember signing anything like that. He couldn't. But memory after a stroke is fragile, like trying to grab water with your hands. He started doubting himself, and I hated watching that happen. So I took the folder and put it somewhere safer, a locked drawer only I knew about. Not out of spite, out of fear. Because now I had questions eating at me nightly. Why did Linda want finance authority? Why involve Daniel separately? What was signed behind my back? And why did they think I'd hand things over? The more I thought, the more dots connected. Linda had always acted like I was temporary, an intruder. Her son was the real family, and I was merely the second wife. I still clung to hope that I was wrong, paranoid, emotional. But hope doesn't erase evidence. And the next event ripped away the last piece of denial I was holding on to. One afternoon, Thomas had a doctor appointment. I arrived early. Linda was already there, talking to the doctor, alone. When I entered, she stiffened. The doctor turned to me kindly and said, "So you, Linda, and your son will manage Thomas's medical and financial decisions moving forward." My stomach twisted. What? I never agreed to that. Linda didn't even flinch. Oh, Emily must have forgotten. She signed the paperwork. I hadn't. I never would. Something inside me hardened. Quiet. Cold. Because from that moment on, I knew this wasn't misunderstanding. It was a plan. Carefully woven, patiently executed, and I was the target. What I found next would confirm everything and change the course of our lives permanently. I didn't sleep that night. The doctor's words replayed in my head like a broken record. You, Linda, and your son will manage decisions moving forward. No, not without my consent. So I began searching, calmly at first, then with shaking hands. Emails, drawers, glove compartments. I didn't even know what I was looking for, only that something existed, hidden, waiting to be found. And I did find something. In Thomas's desk, beneath old birthday cards and receipts, there was a second folder, almost identical to the first, but thicker. I opened it slowly. My breath caught. Power of attorney forms, all transferring control to Linda if Thomas became cognitively impaired. Signed, dated, witnessed. Witness names Linda and Daniel. No attorney. No medical confirmation. No me. My hands went numb, like my bones were hollow. Every page felt like betrayal printed in ink. A note was tucked inside, handwriting I recognized as Linda's. Once completed, move accounts. Don't tell her yet. Huh. That was me. I wasn't even named. Just her, the obstacle. My knees actually buckled. I sat on the floor, papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. I begged myself to believe this was misunderstanding, desperation, stress, anything but malice. But sometimes truth knocks softly. Other times, it kicks the door open. I confronted Thomas first, gently. Not accusing, only asking. He stared at the paperwork a long time. Confused, devastated. He kept shaking his head, repeating the same broken whisper. I don't remember signing this. And that hurt more than anything. Because whether he signed willingly or through manipulation, he couldn't tell me. Later that day, Daniel visited. I asked him directly, "Did you know about this transfer?" He tensed. Eyes darted away. "I mean, Mom said Dad wanted it. She said you agreed." Agreed? I laughed, not because it was funny, but because disbelief sometimes escapes as sound. I told him I never agreed. His face flushed, guilt creeping up his neck, like a child caught with stolen candy. He whispered, almost too soft, "Mom said if you were out of the way, things would be simpler." There it was, the sentence I feared. If you were out of the way, not included, not family, not trusted, removed. That night, alone in the guest room because Thomas's sleep was restless, I cried into a pillow so he wouldn't hear. Cried until the pillow was soaked and my chest ached. I loved that boy, not biologically, but with every choice. Every dinner plate I set for him, every birthday cake I baked, every quiet moment I told myself patience would build love. Yet I was nothing more than a placeholder to them. a bridge to the assets they wanted. It broke me. Fully. Cleanly. People think heartbreak is loud. Mine was silent, a slow collapse inside the chest. At my lowest, I considered walking away, letting them have everything, starting over. But then I looked at Thomas sleeping, frail, unaware, trusting. He needed someone who truly loved him, not someone who saw him as a signature machine. I held his hand and whispered, "I won't let them strip you of dignity." Something shifted inside me, the cracking of naive hope into solid resolve, because now I had knowledge, evidence, motive. But evidence means little without action. If I stayed passive, I'd lose everything: home, rights, memories, even Thomas himself. So I stood up, wiped my face, and made a decision. I would fight, quietly, calmly, legally, not for money, but for respect, for my place as his wife, for truth. And the first step was simple. I would rewrite my will, not to be petty, but to force accountability, to show them I wasn't powerless, to protect what mattered most. They thought I was weak, emotional, easy to remove. They were about to learn who I truly was. The morning after I found the second folder, something inside me felt different. Not broken, sharpened. Like grief had burned away softness and left steel in its place. I made breakfast like always, oatmeal for Thomas, toast for myself, but every movement was deliberate. Calm, controlled, a woman preparing for war without raising her voice. I knew emotion alone wouldn't protect us. I needed proof, guidance, and a plan that left no room for loopholes. So when Daniel left for class and Linda wasn't around, I helped Thomas into the car and drove to our attorney, Mr. Harrison, a man Thomas trusted for years. He looked at me quietly as I laid out the documents, page by page. He adjusted his glasses once, slowly, then again. Finally, he said the words that changed everything. "These signatures don't look voluntary, and without your consent, they hold no power." Relief washed over me, warm, dizzying. But he wasn't finished. He tapped the transfer notes Linda wrote. "This suggests intent to remove you. If they attempt to act on this, you could legally challenge it, but only with preparation." Preparation, a word that tasted like strength. He leaned forward, voice firm. "You need your own will. Clear, protected, irrevocable without court." That hit me like a spark. Not revenge, protection. For me, for Thomas, for everything we built together. So I asked the question forming quietly in my chest. "Can we write one today?" He nodded, almost proud. And just like that, we began. We spent 2 hours drafting. Not large, dramatic changes, precise ones. My half of assets to charity and Thomas's medical trust. House ownership locked under survivorship clause. A final decision authority solely between me and Thomas, unless he chose otherwise in lucid state. Not to cut Daniel out entirely, only to ensure fairness. But one clause stood like a wall. If manipulation or coercion was proven, inheritance would skip Daniel and go to the trust. A clause inspired by Linda herself. Irony has a sense of humor. While signing, my hands trembled, not from fear, but empowerment. Because this was the moment sorrow turned into strategy. When we finished, Mr. Harrison closed the folder gently. "Emily, document everything. Dates, visits, comments, save emails, voice notes if legal in your state. Quiet strength wins more than anger ever could." Quiet strength, the opposite of Linda's loud entitlement. Before leaving, he asked one last thing. "Do you want to keep this confidential, for now?" I thought of Linda's smirk, her whispers, her confidence that I would just step aside. I smiled, small, controlled. "Yes, let them believe I'm unaware." Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting louder, but moving in silence while they underestimate you. Life at home changed subtly. I wasn't reactive anymore. I watched, listened, tracked every slip. Daniel stopped greeting me properly. Guilt makes people distant. Linda visited more, but now I noticed her glances toward drawers, documents, bank letters. Each time she looked, she found nothing. Because the real papers weren't here anymore, I kept them in a safety box, one only I could access. Weeks passed, tension like static in air. We ate dinners that tasted like unspoken words, smiled in photos that felt staged. But behind the silence, I was building a wall she couldn't climb. One night, while clearing dishes, I overheard her again, soft, impatient. Daniel, once assets transfer, she won't matter. That sentence didn't break me this time. It motivated me, because she still thought I had no idea. Still believed I was the quiet wife in the background. She didn't know a storm was forming in my own hands. Legal, calm, unshakable. And when the day came for the will reading, she would realize the truth. You don't get to erase someone who built a home with love. The climax was approaching. Decisions would snap into action. They started making moves, unaware I already made mine. Climaxes don't arrive with warning. They snap, suddenly, like a cord pulled too tight. It happened on a Tuesday. I came home from the pharmacy and found Linda in our study again. Drawers open, files scattered. She didn't even flinch when I entered. Her voice was flat, practiced. Where are the documents, Emily? Not what documents. She knew exactly which ones. I stepped forward slowly, placing the pharmacy bag on the table. They are safe. Her eyes narrowed. Safe was the one answer she didn't want. She moved closer, tone rising. You can't stand in the way forever. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm not standing in the way. I'm protecting my husband. Her laugh was sharp, cruel. Please, you were here 5 minutes. I built this family. I gave him a son. You think a second wife replaces that? There it was, the truth she never hid well. I wasn't real family. Not to her. Before I could respond, Thomas weakly called my name from the hallway. He'd heard enough to understand something was wrong. He looked at us, confused, afraid, and asked the question that still stings. Why are you fighting over me? We both froze. Linda spoke feist, syrup sweet again. Oh, honey, I'm just making sure Daniel is secured. You'd want that, right? Thomas hesitated. His eyes shifted to me, searching for grounding. And for the first time, I saw something in him, recognition of who truly stood beside him during the hard nights, the hospital stays, the recovery. He reached for my hand instead. Not hers. Linda saw it. Daniel, standing behind her, saw it too. Jealousy flickered, quick as lightning. But the real strike came days later. Mr. Harrison called. The will reading was set for Friday. Thomas wanted all parties present to finalize decisions. A chance to settle matters with clarity. Legally. Publicly. Linda's confidence was visible even before she walked through the lawyer's door. Chin high. Bag designer. Daniel trailing behind like shadow. She believed this was her victory lap. Saturday. Silence thick enough to chew. Harrison opened the file. Linda leaned forward, smiling already, convinced everything was hers. He began, this document reflects current estate allocation and authority as chosen by the legal spouse, Emily Clark. Her smile faded. Another page turned, crisp, loud, final. Upon medical impairment, decision authority rests with Emily alone unless Thomas verbally requests review in a notarized setting. Linda blinked rapidly. Confusion. Panic. Daniel shifted in his seat. Harrison continued, voice steady, unhurried. Financial access will remain secured. Any attempt to transfer assets without dual consent will void inheritance for implicated parties. Linda's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then came the line that split the room like glass shattering. In case of coercion, manipulation, or fraudulent signatures, inheritance passes not to Daniel, but to the medical trust. Daniel's chest rose sharply. His mother's hand gripped his thigh like claws. And then the final page. The moment she never saw coming. Should Emily pass first, her estate is directed to charity and long-term care for Thomas. Daniel receives sentimental property only, contingent on respectful relationship maintenance. Silence. Pure, stunned silence. Then Linda exploded. She stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. This can't be legal. Harrison only smiled calmly. It is, and it's signed, sealed, witnessed. You were fully aware Emily never agreed to your documents, which we have copies of. Because in that room, the power she thought she owned slipped through her fingers like sand. She called me an outsider, not real family. Yet here I stood, the wife who stayed, and she was the one walking out with nothing but echoing footsteps and a broken plan. But stories don't end with wins. They end with aftermath, truth settling like dust. And what came after surprised even me. The room stayed silent long after Linda stormed out. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft shuffle of papers filled the space. I didn't celebrate, didn't smile. Victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like sitting down after standing too long. Thomas squeezed my hand gently, weak but intentional. There was apology in his eyes, even if he couldn't form the words. And I realized something. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about being seen, being acknowledged as more than the second wife. As we left the office, Daniel lagged behind. When we reached the parking lot, he finally spoke. His voice was small, the bravado gone. I'm sorry. I didn't understand everything. Mom just kept saying you'd replace us. Replace. The word hurt, but differently now, like touching a scar instead of an open wound. I didn't want revenge to define my relationship with him. Thomas deserved peace, not war between the two women in his life, not animosity between his son and his wife. So I told Daniel quietly, no one replaces family, but respect builds it. He looked up then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw a young man instead of a boy trying to please a bitter parent. He nodded slowly, eyes shining with regret. Can I try to make things right? It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. But it was real, and real mattered more than victory. The weeks after the will reading were strangely calm. Linda stopped visiting. No more surprise stops, no late-night whispers. Just a cold quiet, like the house was finally breathing again. We focused on Thomas's therapy. Small steps, slow progress, but progress nonetheless. Some days he could say a full sentence clearly, other days only a word. But every day he tried. And every day, I was there, helping him stand, eat, smile. Daniel started showing up more. Not prompted, not for documents. Just to sit with his father, read to him, watch old baseball games they used to love. Sometimes he stayed after Thomas fell asleep, helping me wash dishes or fold laundry. Small actions that mattered more than grand apologies. One evening, while we cleaned the kitchen, he asked softly, "Why didn't you just fight us back earlier? Mom said you would." I rinsed a plate slowly, letting warm water ground me. "Because love doesn't start with war," I said. "But it shouldn't surrender to manipulation either." He nodded, a long, heavy nod that meant he understood more than he could say. And he did something unexpected. He hugged me. A real hug, not formal, not awkward. A hug that felt like mending fabric instead of tearing it. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Some nights I still felt the sting of what happened. Some mornings Thomas forgot words he remembered the day before. Healing isn't linear, it's circular. But peace settled slowly like dust on sunlight. Linda, on the other hand, grew distant from Daniel. He told me she was furious, not about love, but about losing control. He said she called me names, blamed me, accused him of betrayal. But he looked thoughtful when he told me, "Mom wanted power. You just wanted fairness." It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like clarity. The house feels different now. Quieter, but warm. Not tense air, not hidden glances. Just us, a family built not by blood alone, but by choice and endurance. Sometimes I read old journals and think about how close I came to walking away, how easily silence could have erased everything I fought for. But now, when Thomas holds my hand during therapy and smiles that tired but grateful smile, I know I made the right choice. I protected his dignity. I protected our life. And I found my voice in the process. The woman who once cried into a pillow now sleeps peacefully beside the man she loves, unafraid, unshaken. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's standing firm when others expect you to fall. And my final step, the real closure, still remained. Sharing the story that once broke me, so it can no longer hold power over me. Even now, when I sit on the porch with a cup of evening tea and watch Thomas nap under the soft hum of the living room fan, I think about how fragile life is. How quickly love can be overshadowed by greed. How easily families can fracture when inheritance becomes more important than memories. But I also think about something else, something quieter, softer, healing. Not the loud kind, not the triumphant marching band type. The kind that feels like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. It came slowly, in moments. Daniel laughing at a joke Thomas finally understood. The day Thomas walked 6 steps without support. The morning I found Daniel fixing the porch light that had been broken for months. Not because anyone asked, but because he wanted to. Mending doesn't always arrive with apologies. Sometimes it arrives with actions. Linda never returned. Maybe she thought coming back would be admitting defeat. Maybe she realized that love built on entitlement collapses eventually. Or maybe she simply couldn't face the version of her son that chose respect over resentment. I don't know, and for the first time, I don't need to. Because this story was never just about a will. It was about identity, belonging, learning that marriage doesn't erase history, it adds to it. And sometimes, it demands courage to defend the love you've earned. People often say step-parents are secondary, supplemental, replaceable. But love is not measured by blood. It's measured by presence, by sacrifices no one sees, by hands that hold through sickness, by hearts that stay when things fall apart. I stayed, not because it was easy, but because real family is chosen with actions, not birth certificates. Sometimes I wonder how things would look if I had walked away. If I'd surrendered like they expected. Maybe Daniel would still believe I was the obstacle. Maybe Thomas would be living in a home with strangers running his decisions. Maybe guilt would live in my chest like a stone instead of peace. But I didn't walk. I learned something through this storm. A line I keep close, one I hope someone hearing my voice tonight might need too. Protect your place in the story, or someone else will write it for you. I speak it softly now, like a prayer to anyone who has ever felt pushed aside, unseen, undervalued. Stand tall. Not with anger, but with truth. Because truth is quieter than rage, but heavier than lies. And the irony is almost poetic. The thing Linda used to hurt me became the thing that freed me. Her attempt to cut me out forced me to define who I was, not to her, but to myself. A wife, a caregiver, a woman who fought with grace, a woman who chose dignity over revenge. So if you're still listening, thank you. Thank you for holding space for a story I carried in silence for too long. Now it belongs not only to me, but to you, to anyone who has ever stood at the edge of being erased and said, not today. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. As for the moral, the final line I want to leave with you tonight. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by who stands beside you when the world shakes. And I chose to stand.